There is something moving through your life right now. Something invisible, something you cannot touch, cannot measure, yet it shapes everything you do. Think about it for a moment. Right now, as you listen to these words, it's there. Moving. Advancing. Consuming the space between this breath and the next. You notice it only in its betrayals. A deadline rushing faster than your effort, a night vanishing before you felt it, a year slipping like sand through fingers. Your child's birthday arrives again, and you wonder where the months went. You promise yourself you'll start that project tomorrow, and tomorrow becomes next week, next month, never. We call it time. But time is stranger than we think. Consider this. You cannot pause it. Not for a single second. You cannot rewind it, no matter how desperately you wish to. You cannot fast forward through the difficult moments, though we spend half our lives wishing we could. And yet, every structure of your life, work, school, relationships, governments, the entire architecture of human civilization, bends to it without question. We schedule our days in blocks of it. We measure our productivity by it. We age because of it. We fear running out of it. We say we're killing time or saving time or making time, as if it was something we could manipulate, control, possess. But can we? Almost no one notices this paradox, this strange tyranny we live under. We accept it as absolute, unchangeable, fundamental to reality itself. Until one man began to wonder, what if time is not ours to master, but borrowed? And what if the world stops lending it to us? This is the story of Michel Siffre, the man who entered darkness to discover what happens when time itself disappears. Michel Siffre was not drawn to the hurry of life. Even as a young man, while his peers rushed through university hallways, chased careers, and measured success in promotions and paychecks, Michel found himself captivated by things that moved at their own pace. Rocks, glacier, mountains, objects that ignored human urgency entirely. Imagine being fascinated by stillness in a world obsessed with speed. While others checked their watches, Michel would stand before a cliff face, reading the story written in its layers. Each stripe of sediment was a chapter, thousands, sometimes millions of years compressed into stone. Here was time made visible, but time that laughed at human schedules. Geology became his window into a different rhythm, one where patience was not just a virtue but a language, and waiting was the only necessary skill. To watch ice creep down a mountainside over months, to study stone layers formed over millennia, was to experience time as something vast, silent, and almost infinite. Think about what this does to your perception. Most of us measure time in coffee breaks and lunch hours. We fragment our days into 15-minute increments, back-to-back meetings, scheduled calls. Our calendars are battlegrounds where we fight for control over hours that seem to evaporate. But Michel's work required him to think in eons. A glacier doesn't care about your deadline. A mountain doesn't rush. The erosion of stone follows its own clock, one that makes human lifespans seem like heartbeats. Days outside, measured only by sun, cloud, wind, and the subtle changes in temperature, taught him a new sense of existence. He would spend weeks in remote locations, camping on mountainsides, observing, recording, simply being present with the slow dance of geological change. And something remarkable happened. Hours passed without friction. When you're not checking the time every few minutes, when there's no meeting to rush to, no alarm scheduled to interrupt your focus, time transforms. It stops feeling like an opponent you're wrestling with. Days blended together, not in the forgettable blur of routine, but in a continuous flow of experience. Nothing felt urgent. Nothing wasted. Can you imagine that? Living without the constant pressure of the clock. Most of us have experienced it only in brief moments. A perfect afternoon that seems to stretch forever, a conversation so engaging we forget to check our phones. But Michel lived it. Day after day. Week after week. Time no longer demanded obedience. It existed as a gentle companion, one he could observe without fear or guilt. But it was in the caves where everything changed. Music shifts, becomes more mysterious. Michel's geological work frequently took him underground. Caves hold secrets, ice formations thousands of years old, mineral deposits that reveal ancient climate patterns, chambers carved by water over millennia. They are time capsules, frozen moments from Earth's deep past. Yet something in Michel began to shift during his cave visits. Underground, time behaved differently. Not dramatically, not like a sudden rupture of reality, but subtly, persistently, like a whisper you're not quite sure you heard. He would enter a cave in the morning, planning to spend an hour or two surveying a particular formation. He'd work methodically, taking measurements, making notes, collecting samples. The work felt efficient, focused, and then he would emerge, convinced only minutes had passed, only to discover hours, or even longer, were gone. At first, he blamed fatigue or distraction. Underground work is physically demanding. The darkness plays tricks on the mind. Easy to lose track of time when you're crawling through narrow passages, navigating by headlamp, focused intensely on your work. But the pattern repeated. Again and again. Every cave visit produced the same temporal distortion. Think about what this means. Michel wasn't losing consciousness. He wasn't sleeping or daydreaming. He was actively working, fully present, completely engaged. And yet time was slipping away from him in chunks he couldn't account for. The absence of sun, the absence of shifting seasons, removed all reference points. No shadows moving across the ground to mark the hours. No temperature changes from morning to afternoon. No birds singing at dawn, no dimming light at dusk. Just unchanging darkness and the steady temperature of deep earth. He began to wonder, if humans only sense time through reference, what happens when all cues vanish? The question haunted him. In solitary walks, under a canopy of stars, it whispered, do we truly perceive time, or do we merely infer it? This is not a trivial question. It cuts to the heart of human consciousness itself. We assume time is something we directly experience, like sight or touch. We feel it passing, don't we? We sense the flow of moments, the progression from past to present to future. But what if we're wrong? What if all we truly experience is change? The sun moving, shadows shifting, our bodies aging, our environments transforming. And from these observations, we construct the concept of time. Isolation did not just distort time. It could dismantle it entirely. And Michel realized he could not return to ordinary life without facing the possibility that time itself was conditional, dependent on the world, on cues, on light, on movement. If this were true, then everything we believe about time, its constancy, its objectivity, its absolute nature, might be an illusion. A useful fiction our brains construct to make sense of change. He had to know. Not theorize. Not speculate. No. And there was only one way to find out. He proposed an experiment unlike anything before. Imagine explaining this to people. I want to live in a cave. Alone. In complete darkness. Without clocks or calendars. For months. To see what happens to my sense of time. Most would think you'd lost your mind. What purpose could this serve? What could possibly be worth the risk? Psychological, physical, existential? But Michel wasn't driven by conventional ambitions. He was driven by a question that wouldn't let him rest. What is time without reference? The Alps held a cave, chosen not for its beauty but for its complete isolation. The Scarrison Cave, deep in the maritime Alps. A subterranean chamber far from any artificial light, any human sound, any connection to the surface world except a single rope and telephone line for emergencies. Crossing its threshold meant leaving behind sun, sound, and all external measures. Everything that anchors human beings to temporal reality, gone. Darkness enveloped him. Not the darkness of a closed room, where your eyes eventually adjust and you can make out shapes and shadows. This was absolute darkness. The darkness of deep earth, where no light has ever penetrated, where opening your eyes or closing them makes no difference whatsoever. Footsteps echoed once, then vanished into vast silence. Even his own heartbeat became a phantom rhythm, there, but uncertain, like trying to hear a watch ticking in an empty warehouse. The cave offered nothing, no forward, no backward, no up, no down, only an infinite, indeterminate space in which time might dissolve. But this wasn't just an adventure or a personal challenge. This was science. Rigorous, controlled, revolutionary science. He would be monitored from a distance, But Michel would have no clocks, no calendars, no schedule. Scientists on the surface would track his activities: when he slept, when he woke, when he ate, his body temperature, his heart rate. But they would never tell him what day it was, what time it was, how long he'd been underground. If he faltered, the scientists would only observe. They had strict instructions: do not intervene unless his life is in danger. Do not comfort him. Do not tell him how much longer. Do not give him any temporal reference whatsoever. The pact was absolute uncertainty. Think about what this means psychologically. We structure our lives around knowing where we are in time. 3 more days until the weekend. Only 2 hours left of work. I've been waiting 15 minutes. These references give us endurance, hope, patience. Strip them away, and what remains? To live without temporal reference was to risk perception, memory, and perhaps sanity. Experiments in sensory deprivation had already shown how quickly the human mind can fracture without external input. Hallucinations, paranoia, complete psychological breakdown, sometimes in just hours. But Michel would endure for months. In darkness, in silence, in absolute temporal isolation. Why? Because it was also the only way to truly confront the invisible force that governs our lives. The descent was slow, deliberate. With every step, the outside world grew fainter. Imagine that journey. The cave entrance behind you, a shrinking circle of light. Then a distant glow. Then nothing but the beam of your headlamp cutting through blackness. The rope beneath your hands, rough and real, the only connection to the surface. The temperature dropping, degree by degree. The silence growing louder, that paradox of deep quiet that fills your ears with the sound of your own blood pumping. Depth perception faltered. Direction lost meaning. In absolute darkness, there is no horizon line, no visual anchor. Your brain, desperate for reference points, begins to invent them. Shadows where there are none. Movement in perfect stillness. By the bottom, darkness pressed against consciousness, not empty, but full, dense, almost alive. Some people describe deep cave darkness as peaceful. Others find it oppressive. Michel described it as present, aware, as if the darkness itself were watching. Michel settled in, small and deliberate, ready to surrender to the cave, to the absence, to time itself. His camp was simple. A tent for privacy and warmth. A cot. Scientific instruments to record his physiological data. Books. Notebooks. A telephone connected by a single line to the surface, for emergencies only, and for him to report when he was going to sleep and when he woke. No clock. No watch. No calendar. The scientists above would know exactly what time it was for Michel. But Michel would have no idea. Was it morning? Afternoon? Had he been asleep for 4 hours or 12? Had he been underground for a week or a month? No reference. No anchor. No way to know. The experiment had begun. The experiment had begun to T first. He imposed order on his environment. This is what humans do when faced with chaos. We create structure. We establish routines. We build patterns that give us the illusion of control. Tools, notebooks, routines, a way to anchor himself. He would wake up, eat breakfast, work on his geological surveys, read, eat again, work more, then sleep. A normal day. Or what felt like a normal day. He worked, rested, observed. For a while, the familiar rhythms helped. He could tell himself, I'm fine. This is manageable. I'm still me. But gradually, subtle shifts emerged. Sleep lengthened. At first imperceptibly. He'd wake up feeling refreshed and assume he'd slept his normal 7 or 8 hours. But the scientists monitoring his biorhythms noticed something strange. His sleep cycles were extending. 9 hours. 10. 12. Waking hours stretched too. What felt like a normal day of activity to Michel was actually lasting 30, 36, even 40 hours. His internal clock was drifting, slowly expanding like a balloon inflating. Tasks that once demanded effort were completed almost effortlessly. Time pressure creates stress. Deadlines create anxiety. Without them, work became meditative. He could spend what felt like a pleasant hour examining a rock formation, and it didn't matter if it was actually 3 hours or 6. There was no meeting to rush to, no schedule to keep. Above ground, scientists noticed the elongation of activity, slowed heart rhythms, altered cycles. They watched in fascination as Michel's body divorced itself from the 24-hour day that governs all life on Earth's surface. For Michel, the invisible pressure of time had vanished entirely, and it felt liberating. Think about the time pressure you live under. The alarm that jolts you awake. The rush to get ready, get to work, get things done. The meetings that run over. The deadlines that loom. The sense that there's never enough time, that you're always behind, always rushing, always late. Now imagine all of that gone. Just gone. You wake when you're rested. You work when you feel energized. You rest when you're tired. No clock watching. No schedule anxiety. No guilt about wasting time. At first, Michel experienced this as peace. Pure, profound peace. But then the fractures appeared. Quietly at first. Almost unnoticeably. Naps lasted longer than expected. Or did they? Without a clock, how would he know? He'd lie down feeling tired, close his eyes, and when he opened them, he'd feel refreshed. But had it been 20 minutes or 4 hours? There was no way to tell. Hours compressed or expanded unpredictably. A meal would feel rushed, over in moments. But reading a book could stretch into what felt like an eternity of absorption, where he'd look up from the pages surprised to find himself still in the same position, the same place. Time loosened its grip, and yet Michel felt productive, calm, fully present. Without the tyranny of the clock, he could give his complete attention to whatever he was doing. No part of his mind calculating how much time remained, no internal voice nagging that he should be doing something else. But memory softened too. This was more disturbing. Events blurred. Sequences merged. He would remember doing something, examining a particular rock formation, writing in his notebook, eating a meal, but couldn't remember when. Yesterday? Last week? An hour ago? The concept of yesterday began to lose meaning. Yesterday implies a clear boundary, a sleep cycle that separates today from what came before. But when your sleep cycles are 36 hours long, when you can't tell if you slept for 8 hours or 15, when there's no sunrise to mark a new day, what is yesterday? Faces lost sharpness. He'd brought photographs with him, family, friends, loved ones. Faces that should be instantly recognizable, intimately known. But as time passed, or failed to pass, the photographs became strange. He could identify people cognitively, this is my sister. But the emotional recognition, the immediate warm familiarity, began to fade. To anchor himself, he spoke aloud, narrating thoughts, repeating observations. Voice becomes more intimate, as if we're hearing his thoughts. It's Tuesday. I think it's Tuesday. I've been awake for, I don't know, several hours. I'm examining the stalactite in the eastern chamber. It's grown approximately 3 millimeters since when? Since I first measured it. That was the second day. Or the 5th day. Or. Words became lifelines, keeping him tethered to a reality that itself was unanchored. Language creates structure. By describing his experiences, Michel could create a narrative thread, a story that had a beginning, middle, and progression. Even if he couldn't say when things happened, he could say what happened, and in what order. First this, then that, then the other thing. But even this began to slip. Eventually, the structure of hours and days dissolved. Not catastrophically. Not in a moment of breakdown or panic. Just gradually. Like ice melting so slowly you don't notice until it's water. Sleep and wakefulness occurred organically. He would feel tired, so he would sleep. He would wake up, so he would be active. There was no bedtime, no morning. Just cycles of rest and activity flowing into each other. Darkness was no longer empty. It was a canvas for consciousness. In the absence of external stimuli, his mind became extraordinarily active. Thoughts that would normally be interrupted by a ringing phone, a honking car, a colleague's question. These thoughts could extend, develop, elaborate. He would follow a single idea for what felt like hours, exploring every angle, every implication, every connection. Moments expanded, contracted, sometimes disappeared entirely. He would become absorbed in a task, writing, reading, examining a geological sample, and then suddenly realize he had no idea how long he'd been doing it. The activity had consumed time, or time had consumed the activity, or time had simply ceased to exist and there was only the eternal present of complete absorption. Michel realized that perhaps humans never truly experience time, only interpret it. This was the profound insight emerging from the darkness. We don't experience time. We can't. Time isn't something you can touch or taste or see. It's not a sensation like heat or cold. It's an inference, a construction, a story we tell ourselves based on change. The sun moves across the sky, so we infer time has passed. We feel hunger, so we infer it's been hours since we ate. We notice fatigue, so we infer it's time to sleep. Remove the changes, the moving sun, the regular meals, the day-night cycle, and the inference collapses. What remains is just experience. Pure, undifferentiated experience. Emotions followed suit. Calm, frustration, joy, dread, they appeared without cause, unmoored from events or triggers. This might be the strangest part of Michel's experience. In normal life, emotions have causes. You're happy because something good happened. You're anxious because you have a deadline. You're sad because you received bad news. But in the cave, emotions arose spontaneously, like weather. He would be working contentedly, and suddenly a wave of profound sadness would wash over him. For no reason. Nothing had happened. Nothing had changed. The sadness would simply appear, sit with him for a while, then fade. Or he'd wake from sleep feeling euphoric, filled with joy and energy and optimism, again, for no identifiable reason. Dread, contentment, loneliness, peace. They rose and fell like currents, sometimes simultaneously, sometimes in contradiction. He could be lonely and content at the same time, anxious and peaceful, sad and joyful. Michel observed this clinical theater of consciousness with wonder, cataloguing each shift. Time had dissolved, yet self persisted, exploring pure experience. Pause. As days, or whatever could be called days, stretched, the cave became home. This is perhaps the most remarkable transformation. What began as an experiment, an ordeal to be endured, gradually became normal, comfortable, even preferable. Darkness enveloped him like a protective shroud. In the beginning, the darkness was oppressive, threatening, full of imagined dangers. But familiarity breeds comfort. The darkness became a friend, a constant, reliable presence. Silence became comforting. The absence of noise, no traffic, no voices, no music, no mechanical hum, created a space where his own thoughts could be heard with crystal clarity. In the modern world, we're bombarded with sound constantly. We forget what true silence feels like. Steps through the chambers were guided by memory and intuition. He knew the cave now. Every rock, every formation, every subtle change in temperature or air flow. He could navigate in complete darkness, hands trailing along familiar stone, feet finding the path automatically. Time no longer pressed. This phrase barely captures the liberation he felt. Imagine never having to worry about being late. Never checking the time. Never feeling that creeping anxiety that you're behind schedule, that the day is getting away from you, that there's not enough time. Sleep, work, reflection flowed according to internal rhythm, not measured minutes. His body told him when to rest. His mind told him when to work. His curiosity told him when to explore. No external authority, no clock, no schedule-imposed order from outside. The order came from within. The outside world, with its schedules and deadlines, felt distant, irrelevant, almost intrusive. Large spans of time vanished unnoticed. The scientists monitoring Michel's activities were astonished. Weeks were passing. Months. But Michel's subjective experience bore almost no relationship to calendar time. Days that should have felt interminable passed quickly. Hours that should have flown by seemed to stretch. Life inside the cave remained rich, fully experienced, even as the usual markers of past and future disappeared. He wasn't suffering. This is crucial to understand. This wasn't torture or deprivation, at least, not anymore. After the initial adjustment, Michel was thriving. His notes were detailed, insightful, full of observations about consciousness, time, and perception. He was reading, thinking, working. He was living, perhaps more fully than ever before. Michel realized that the cave was not just shelter, but a realm where presence itself became absolute. Without past and future fighting for attention, there was only now. This moment. This breath. This thought. This experience. Total presence. Complete absorption in the eternal now. Mystics and meditators spend lifetimes seeking this state. Michel had stumbled into it by accident, by removing time. Then, suddenly, the outside world intruded. A voice. A human presence. The phone, that single line to the surface, used only for his daily sleep-wake reports, rang at an unusual time. Michel, the experiment is complete. We're bringing you up. A month had passed. Actually, 2 months. 63 days, to be precise. But to Michel, it felt like perhaps 3 weeks. Maybe 4 at most. The world had moved forward with brutal insistence. While he existed in timeless suspension, the calendar had turned pages. Spring had advanced. People had lived weeks of their lives, birthdays celebrated, work completed, relationships evolved. The calendar, the sun, the minutes, everything returned, sharp and overwhelming. Michel realized the experiment had revealed a profound truth. Time is conditional, fragile, dependent on context and reference. All those hours we measure so carefully, divide so precisely, schedule so rigidly, they're not fundamental features of reality. They are constructs. Useful constructs, necessary for coordination and civilization, but constructs nonetheless. Time doesn't exist out there in some absolute sense. It exists in the relationship between our consciousness and the changing world around us. Remove the changing world, and time loses coherence. But now came the hardest part, returning to a world where time is absolute, where it cannot be questioned or ignored. Emerging, he struggled to reconcile the cave's timelessness with the outside world's tyranny. The ascent was gradual, but each meter toward the surface brought time rushing back like water into a punctured hull. Lights hurt. After months in absolute darkness, even dim light was excruciating. He had to wear dark goggles for weeks. The sun, that same sun he'd spent years studying geological formations under, was now an enemy, a painful intruder. Noise overwhelmed. The sound of wind, of birds, of distant traffic, sounds most people don't even notice, crashed over him like waves. The modern world is so loud. We don't realize it until we've experienced true silence. Movement felt aggressive. Cars rushing by. People hurrying. Everything moving so fast, so urgently, for no reason he could fathom. Every clock, every schedule demanded obedience. Pause. This is what broke him. Not the cave. Not the isolation. Not the darkness or the timelessness. The return to time's tyranny. Appointments. Be here at 3 p.m. sharp. Why? What cosmic law demands that this particular meeting happen at this particular moment? Deadlines. This must be finished by Friday. Why Friday? Why not Saturday, or next Tuesday, or whenever it's actually done well? Schedules. Every hour blocked out, accounted for, assigned a purpose and task. Yet he carried within him the knowledge that time can dissolve and reassemble. That it is not absolute, only interpreted. That human perception shapes what we call minutes, hours, days. The reintegration was difficult. Friends and colleagues noticed the change in Michel. He was different, distant, disconnected from normal urgencies. Someone would say, "Hurry, we're going to be late," and Michel would feel confused. Late for what? Late according to whose measurement? What terrible thing would happen if they arrived at 7:05 instead of 7 o'clock? The arbitrary precision of modern timekeeping, down to the second, the millisecond, seemed absurd after months when he couldn't tell if an hour had passed or a day. But gradually, subtly, he found a way to exist in both worlds. Even outside, Michel moved differently. Time became elastic, stretching, folding, persisting in subtle rhythms between breaths, pauses, glances, and footsteps. He would stand at a traffic light, and where others fumed at the delay, checking their watches, calculating the seconds wasted, Michel would simply be present, noticing the way light filtered through leaves, the pattern of clouds, the texture of the moment. Traffic lights lingered, conversations meandered, moments expanded. He learned to let time pool around him, to not always be rushing forward toward the next thing. In conversation, he would pause, really pause, before responding. Not because he was slow or confused, but because he was truly considering, truly present. Others found it unsettling at first. We're not used to people who don't rush, who don't fill silence, who seem to exist at a different tempo. But some found it captivating. Talking to Michel was different. He listened in a way most people don't, completely, without simultaneously planning his response or thinking about what he needed to do next. He sensed duration where others only measured it. Pause. This is the gift the cave gave him. Not the ability to escape time, that's impossible in the social world, but the ability to experience it differently. Where others experience time as a scarce resource to be hoarded and optimized, Michel experienced it as a medium to move through, sometimes thick, sometimes thin, but always there, always available. The hidden rhythm of existence, the invisible pulse of life, revealed itself, subtle, persistent, unbound by instruments. Beneath the tick of clocks, beneath the march of calendars, there's another rhythm. The rhythm of breath, of heartbeat, of attention and awareness, of being alive in this moment, this one moment, the only moment that actually exists. He observed the world and the people in it, realizing that much of life is lost to clocks, alarms, schedules, and rigid measurement. Think about your own life for a moment. How much of it is spent watching the clock, waiting for time to pass? Wishing the workday would end, wishing the week would finish, wishing it were Friday, wishing away the present moment in anticipation of some future moment that will somehow be better? We measure life in increments so small we lose sight of the experience itself. We plan vacations months in advance, then spend the vacation taking photos to prove we were there, barely experiencing it because we're already thinking about work resuming afterward. Michel's experiment proved something profound. Time does not govern us entirely. We interpret it, obey it, fear it, but it is not absolute. His work inspired an entire field of study, chronobiology, the science of biological rhythms. Scientists realized that humans aren't machines that operate on fixed schedules. We have internal clocks, circadian rhythms, that can drift, adjust, recalibrate when freed from external time cues. Later experiments confirmed Michel's findings. When isolated from day-night cycles, most humans naturally drift toward a 25-hour day. Some extend even further, to 30 or 40-hour cycles of sleep and wakefulness. Our bodies want a different rhythm than the one we force upon them. NASA studied Michel's research when planning long-duration space missions. How do you maintain a crew's psychological health when they're isolated from Earth's day-night cycle, floating in the eternal darkness of space? Medical researchers used his insights to understand sleep disorders, shift work dysfunction, seasonal affective disorder, all conditions where our internal time sense conflicts with external demands. Michel had seen what lies beneath the tyranny of hours, the quiet, profound flow of existence itself. Strip away the measurements, the divisions, the constant tracking and accounting of minutes, and what remains? Awareness, presence, experience. The moment you're in right now is the only moment that exists. The past is memory. The future is imagination. But this moment, this breath, this heartbeat, this sensation of being alive, this is real. We spend so much time living outside the present, regretting the past, anxious about the future, planning, preparing, anticipating, remembering, everything except just being here. Michel's months in the cave taught him that when you remove past and future, when you stop measuring and tracking and scheduling, you don't lose life. You find it. And he carried it forward, not as theory, not as abstraction, but as lived experience. Michel continued his geological work, but with a different quality of attention. He would spend days in the field, but never rushed, never felt behind. The rocks had waited millions of years, they could wait a few more hours. He taught students not just about geology, but about patience, about observation, about being present with what is, rather than hurrying toward what's next. He wrote extensively about his experiences, but struggled to fully convey what he discovered. How do you explain timelessness to people who live by the second hand? How do you describe the liberation of having no schedule to people whose lives are ruled by calendars? Some understood. Those who had experienced their own moments of timelessness, in meditation, in flow states, in moments of complete absorption, recognized what Michel was describing. Others thought he was being impractical, even irresponsible. We can't all live in caves, they'd say. Society requires schedules. Civilization depends on coordination. And Michel would agree. He wasn't advocating abandoning time entirely. That's impossible in a social world. But he was suggesting that we could relate to time differently. That we could use it as a tool without being enslaved by it. That we could move through our days with more presence, more awareness, less urgency and anxiety. Time, he understood, is everywhere and nowhere. It's in the ticking clock, but also in the space between ticks. It's in the calendar, but also in the moment that has no date. It's in the schedule, but also in the spontaneous, unplanned experience. It is absence and presence. The absence of pressure. The presence of awareness. It is not what we count, it is what we feel, what we live. You can count seconds, minutes, hours. You can fill every moment with productive activity. You can schedule every hour of every day. But none of that is time itself. It's just measurement, organization, control. Time itself is the medium through which consciousness moves. It's the space where life happens. And it's far stranger, far more fluid, far less absolute than we pretend. And once you have experienced life without it, nothing can ever be the same again. Michel Siffre's experiment was meant to last 2 months. He later repeated it, staying underground for 6 months. Other scientists built on his work, creating isolation chambers and conducting similar experiments. But the first experiment, those 63 days in the Scarrison cave, changed everything. Not just for science, but for our understanding of human consciousness. Time is not what we thought it was. It's not a river we're swept along by.